The effects of Neptune on the soul as it returns to planet Earth and beyond. The Neptune influences we find in things that have to do with water or have to do with things pertaining to what to some would be mysteries. Neptune makes for love of water. Neptune influences make water or those things having to do with water in various spheres and activity, various relationships with individuals and groups upon and across large bodies of water. We find in Neptune an interest in the unusual, in things pertaining to water. These will be a part of the entity's experience, some sorrows, some joys, but water is the mother in the earth. As given, it is the water and the blood that beareth witness in the earth. Temper these in thy mind, in thy purpose, and they will grow to mean those things upon which the soul may take its rest, yea, its assurance in the things of the spirit. We find also the urge in Neptune to be associated with those things, people, places having to do with water. Water is the mother of materiality. Don't let materiality and material things, then, be put first and foremost in thy experience. That is the next warning. Don't let material things supplant spiritual things, but know that the material things should be a result of entertaining the spiritual forces, the creative energies and activities, and the mental application should be to coordinate and cooperate with the efforts of spiritual purposes and ideals to bring material results in the experience of the entity. And those influences in Neptune will bring those of the mystic forces as are seen in the influences that come about the entity, as related to the influences of mysterious experiences, movements as may be seen, felt, heard or experienced by the entity from unseen sources. These should not be taken as evil omens, nor of those influences following that would be hindrances, rather may the entity apply same in the experiences of self and come to be known, by the applications of the influences, as one with a keen insight or one intuitively led and guided into the proper choosing, the proper relationships, the proper attitudes, the proper conditions for the better development of self and of those conditions as related to individuals, peoples, and others about self. In Neptune we find the mystery, or the psychic forces, the spiritual expressions of creating, as expressed or manifested, latent and mentally and spiritually, by the very vibrations or emanations from the presence of the entity among others. Yet because of these the entity at times feels as if it is causing suppression among others. For, where there is a conversation in a group, the entrance of the entity will stop it. Thus the entity at times feels, innately, as if something is being withheld, or as if the presence casts a damper. Rather know that it is awe and inspiration, and feel sorry for others, not for self, under such expressions. Hence we will find also the influence of Neptune, not so much as that ordinarily seen from the activities of waters, but rather as these become associated with the realities in the experiences in the earth. Hence those things that have to do with the kingdoms of the earth for the activities in the experience of man will be the activities of the entity or those inclinations, and through those channels may the greater development materially come, and in the activities of the entity spiritually and mentally the greater development in the present experience. In Neptune we find things pertaining to air and water have an influence in the material, as well as in the social life of the entity, and these also must be as adjustments to the purposes and ideals of the entity, in its relationships to things, as well as to individuals or conditions which arise in the experience. Neptune, stay close to things that have to do with water, and the spirit, the purpose, the hope, the heart of things. In Neptune we will find rather that water and water's associations, those things that sail over waters, those that deal with peoples beyond waters, all of these are a part of the entity's experience, innately and manifestedly, according to, of course, the activity of the entity and the choices made. But in such fields may the entity work to advantage, in that the natural inclinations are in these directions. In Neptune there comes those influences as will be in travel in wide expanses of space, many peoples, many positions of that character, that requires the application of all that has been or may be given in the development of the mental abilities of the entity. The mysticism as of Neptune. And those that we find in Neptune, bringing a love for the mysterious forces, yet applying self rather in a material manner as to the benefits the self may render others, but the mystic and occult make for an interest to the entity that may be builded or applied in the present experience. From the Neptune influences, keep away from large bodies of water. These are opposite from much of that accredited as an influence from the astrological aspects of Neptune. Though those things that come from and over large bodies of water, places and surroundings of such nature, will be of a great interest to the entity, and the knowledge of same should be a part of the entity's experience. In Neptune we find the interest in the mystical, or the mystical spiritual things in the affairs of individuals, as well as water becoming a part of the experiences of the entity, and these for help as well as for woe have been in the experience. From Neptune, as indicated, water and things pertaining to same must eventually be the manner in the material plane in which the entity will have to do with associations, its associations with individuals who have to do with things pertaining to the sea, or the sea's products, or the sea's ability to carry on, and shipping or the like. These will bring greater influences for material benefits into the experience of the entity. In Neptune, as the opposite from Uranus, we find also influences appearing at times, but from the sojourns. From Neptune we find the activities pertaining to the stage and to activity upon airways, waterways, or such as would have to do with the water signs, as related to others as well as to self. From the Neptune influence we find that having to do with water, or individuals or conditions coming from over waters, will or may have a direct influence upon the entity for good, dependent upon the use of same. The ability as an eloquent and a direct speaker becomes a part of the entity's experience. Thus, any phase of material activity in which there are the needs for the use of the abilities as an orator or a speaker, or an actor in that direction, would be well for the entity to consider seriously. Also from the Neptune influences we find that water, air, and things pertaining to either of these, or the dwelling of the body close to same, will be a part of the mental consciousness of the entity, which is indicated at times by the dreams of the entity and its ability to fly itself, or to arise and soar in the unconscious consciousnesses of activity and influences, which might bring such to bear. In Neptune we find the interest in things from or of or upon water, as well as the mysteries of lines. Hence in the activities, from astrological aspects, building is a part of the entity's experience, though, as will be seen, harmonious surroundings are needed for the greater contentment. Then, let not disturbances confuse nor cause digression from thy purpose. And that in the Neptune is seen the music, or the attunement to rhythm, and in this much development may come for the entity, though in the field of endeavors these should be guided aright, and be led in that of the diplomatic relations, as will have to do with foreign countries, as will be seen from the experiences of the entity, and the abilities as lie innate and manifesting in Jupiter and Mercury. In Neptune we see something again of the methodical life, in a mystic manner. Be not too mindful of mysticism, unless weighed well with those influences in love and nobleness. As to that plane from which the soul and spirit took its flight to the present earth plane, from that far-away force as exercised in Neptune. Hence we have an entity that to self and all others, for many, many moons present spheres conditions will be peculiar to other people, rarely ever being understood, yet one with the spiritual insight of the developing in earth plane, and one whom others would be, could be, benefited by being in contact with this entity. Has the entity any psychic ability or powers, and if so, in what way may this be developed and used, primarily for the welfare of others? These are latent in each and every individual, as has been given. The mystic is calls to the entity in and through the Neptune forces, as has been seen as regarding waters, and of the universal forces, as is relating to water, as the creative force, for, as is seen, from out of these all force or form, or matter, begins its development, and in this relation the entity has his share, and it may be developed by application, not by just thinking, but by applying. To think is to act, to some, to others it is only an interesting pastime. Application is a different condition. From Neptune we find those creative activities, the artist and yet visionary at times, or considered so by others. Yet the approach to the mystical comes through the relationships to water, large bodies of same. And the abilities in material manifestation lie in activities having to do with things and conditions, as pertain to sailing, shipping, or construction of things from the water. Always live close to large bodies of water. We find in Neptune the power of water, or of the influences about same, the creative expression, the ability to aid in reviving or in giving life to things. And most anything that would be planted in the earth by the entity would live. And flowers and those things that are cut from nature blossom or give off better perfume by being about or on the body of the entity, and there are few of which this could be said. And those influences in Neptune brings the effect upon the entity of mystic influences. Hence there are those peculiar character of stories, or life, or experiences of others that becomes most interesting to the entity, and that to which it delves, or likes to delve into, that makes also for those variations as exist in the ideas of others, and the ideas of the entity itself. Also, until it reaches at least the next 5 years, must the entity be mindful that there are those assimilations in the physical body that will make for more blood, nerve and sinew in the physical body. The natural inclinations are to the mysterious, to those that are of the mental, and those that partake of that is reached without the physical efforts that others see. Then, be mindful that the physical is builded on a physical basis, but lose not that contact that the entity has and holds with the mental and the mysteries of the material, as well as the spiritual life. One that, in the material forces as seen in those of the Neptune's influence, enjoys those that have to do with air, water, and these that make of the mysteries in either. These are those influence innate in the entity's experience. And the abilities as apply from the influence as seen innate and manifested in the entity's present experience, that ability to be often the peacemaker, or to become as oil upon troubled waters in many directions. Neptune, things that have to do with water, interests in things in water, things that come from over water. And investments made in things that ply in water may be very good for the entity. And consider same when interesting self in things of that nature. Before this the entity was in the land far west of the present nativity, and inland. Notice that Neptune is not active. Water and things over water may be, but from the better elements in Jupiter. So, inland, be a landlubber, though it may cause a heartache occasionally, if there are those activities such as in the periods before that when the entity journeyed far over the seas, for then it brought to the activities of many lands those things that have been as many questions since then. We find in Neptune the interest in things on water, in water. Thus the activities of the entity should have to do with things that go upon, in, across, or under water. These are the outlets for the better mental and spiritual import. These, then, if they are directed aright, bring into materialization those things which are the greater helpful influences in the experience of this entity. In Neptune we find the interest in the love life of a home, more than in the individual contributions that each may make for a home. For, every experience in the material world arises from the correlation of one incident with another or one's feelings from one period to another. We find in Neptune those things having to do with water. Then, live or dwell or abide by quantities of water, preferably streams. Meditate close to the brooks, as did the prophet in Kidron. These will bring to thy consciousness the ability to send out that healing force that expands from his consciousness. We find in Neptune the interest in psychological effects and the manner in which they influence individuals under varied environments. These are the urges. These are the influences as the mental background of this entity. From Neptune, as indicated, we find water as an influence, and especially colors, or lacy surroundings, or fancy dress, a great deal of embellishment in whatever activity the entity may undertake, with a great deal of frills and same. In Neptune, those of the mysticism, mystery, spiritual insight, spiritual development. One that the influence in Neptune has brought and brings much of the mystic and the understandable things of symbols, signs, days, years, numbers. These to the entity mean and influence much. In that of the overzealousness in any of the influences that make for either very good or very bad, or those that come under such influence, brings that of exceptional abilities of the entity in some respects, and so not understandable to others. The entity, then, is one that may be considered by many as too overzealous or not zealous enough, too lax and again too stern, too applicable to influences and again not other than headstrong. Neptune brings the associations with those who have to do with water signs or water activities. This is also the mystic influence and the intuitive force that arises in the varied experiences of this entity. From Neptune we find the artistic urge of the entity and those things that pertain to the elements, as water, fire, wind, storm and the like. These are the particular urges or basis for urges in the activities in an artistic temperament or urge. These, then, will find their greater expression near bodies of water and near those environs where the entity's activities in the Earth's plane have been a portion of the entity's experience. What are the effects of Neptune in conjunction with the Sun in one's horoscope? Neptune, of course, is the water sign and is of the farther distance, and in conjunction with the Sun in the sign of the individual is that inclination or having the effect upon the individual through that particular period of being open-minded to spiritual or higher influences of the mystical nature, as represented in the figure of the body through those particular periods. Before this the entity was in the land of the present nativity, during those periods when there were those turmoils in what was then Fort Dearborn, in those experiences when the entity with many others fled for safety to the east and the south. The entity's losing of its life, as did many, in what is now the Ohio, causes a latent dread of water, and combined with the Neptune forces, to which it brought the activities of the entity, makes for that latent fear, though the body-mind desires such. So, the entity's experience was cut short, though it had through that sojourn as Bertha Baldwin gained in its search for that in the tenets and teachings of the time of the spiritual nature, to interpret in self its relationship to the whole, as had been a part of the experience before that. From Neptune we find those influences that make the entity often called by many one that acts most normal under the influence of hunches, mysterious thoughts, signs, impressions, that to others are imaginative, but that to the entity are the right thing, though often adverse to the mind, development or thought of others. In the influences in Neptune, water ever is an important factor. The body will and the body has covered large expanses of water. Many lands will be seen and known by the entity in the present experience and has been in the past. No place is strange or surroundings peculiar to the entity. Not that the experiences have been so builded as to make them commonplace, for the entity appreciates and to be able to appreciate is an accomplishment to any man. As we find, the Neptune influence makes for the associations necessary about large bodies of water, peculiar activities with individuals who have recently crossed large bodies of water, or who may be relating themselves to such associations or such relations. Also for those innate feelings of the knowledge pertaining to mysteries, as to rites, as to sources pertaining to mysteries that have that flavor rather of the rites and the activities of others under the varied circumstances or experiences that may come into the experience of those sojourning in the material plane. Also interest in those things that pertain to the mysteries of life as itself and as it relates to the psychological effect that such associations may have upon individual activity in and under any given circumstance or conditions. These are rather qualifications, as may be termed, in the development of the entity in the present experience. The urges which arise from astrological sojourn in Neptune make the entity one, as it were, closely identified with things that have to do with water, those products in and over same. Thus, as we find, as application of self in the directions, or directing of conditions which pertain to same, would be the channel through which the urges latent and manifested may have the greater outpouring of abilities of this entity. As to the activities then, as would have to do with things or conditions pertaining to water, as one in associations and activities where there is the exchange of commodities, the experiences of sailing into and being a part of the life experience in many climes and many lands, these all become part of the consciousness and experience of this entity. In the application of the influences, we find in that of Neptune, and of the influences in the occult, these bring for unusual experiences in visions, in dreams, and in that of occult and mystic forces. Because the body ordinarily considered by others as one afflicted, the expressions or visions are not heeded, yet these analyzed will be found to be most valuable to many as individual seeking to know the effect of occult and mystic forces upon the human family, and may be applied in the daily life, as in those of truths, as would be gathered by those seeking such knowledge, but always compare same to that truth, as to whether the spirit of truth or the spirit of contention is the motivative force in expression. In that of condition of the Neptune forces, is meant that of the physical or those of the physical being who are dealing with those of direct forces of the watery nature, keep from. As this, that is, do not go into shipbuilding business, means never try to raise a sailor, as his thoughts would not be in accord with those of a sailor, those of the commercial forces of land nature, rather than forces that have to do with the watery nature, you see. Those of the spiritual nature, for we must ever remember we are saved as by water. In that, they become of a different force entirely, and the effect upon this body is of the material, not spiritual or of soul forces through its development, else it would lose its force in connection with these, that is, it would have no patience with the mannerisms even of the men that have to do with the water forces physically, see. We find also that Neptune and its influence makes for the association near large bodies of water, the crossing of water, the relationships with those things that have to do with water. These will bring not only the very highest in the emotional, in the mental and the material things, but will also bring the sorrows, the disappointments. And those that deal with same should be in the company or association of the entity in all of its dealings and relationships with a material world. For the vibrations as it were from those sojourns there, Neptune, and relationships with individuals who have to do with a commercial relationship with peoples abroad or those that float upon the mighty waters, have a great influence in the experience. In Neptune we find the love of the mystery, the tendency for hero worship, but out of what is termed the ordinary sense, rather as to decided likes and dislikes in the characters of the individuals about whom the entity may study or read. These then necessitate a selection and a choice for not an orthodox balance, as in the ordinary term of the spiritual import, but as a student of the scripture itself for itself, and not told to believe this or that. And let the entity study first Proverbs, then read John, then the whole book. In Neptune, we find always mysterious to self as relation to others, and especially as to the environs, and innately has the waters often called to the entity as a place of abode, yet in the application of self as respecting same has been well. Only during one period might this have been made worthwhile, that during the 16th year, in this present experience, when both Uranus and Venus were in the square of each other as to the entity's influence. It will be the natural influence coming from conditions that have to do with those of the watery nature, or from the sea. One that should be ever in its labors near large bodies of water, for Neptune's forces, as they're exercised, are mental and not mystic forces comes through development from the water nature, see. Through the moon's elements bring the forces in love affairs to deter these conditions, one that is given to thinking lightly of the heart's forces, and should only be in domestic relations late in life, see. As conditions in the financial have been set forth, body is one that will give much of the influence in the mental forces to others. One upon whom many will rely for their mental activities in the earth's forces. The influences in Neptune make for interests and activities of individuals as to their own prowess, their own abilities in given fields, whether in the political, religious, musical, commercial, or in what form. Especially advanced individuals have been of interest to the entity, and often the associations with same, rather than that ordinarily termed which comes from the attributed valuations of indwelling and Neptune influence, of water. Yet rather water has played, does and will always play, an important part in the material activities of the entity, rather than its life or sojourn near or upon water. And brings also some of those periods when there have been accidents in or near water or near accidents that have been a portion of the entity's experience. Neptune making for the interests of the entity in those things having to do with the out of doors, with the activities of animated objects or beings or animals, and in the mysterious nature, as the reading, the stories, the influences that make for an activity in the experience that must deal with something in the mystical or mystic life of individuals. These are as innate influences, and this lends also to the abilities in the entity, if the applications are made in self in the material sense to make or to become interested in things dealing with the nature of inventions, such as traps, catches, things dealing with the activities out of doors, peculiar character of springs, locks, fastenings, that deal with the mysterious activities or workings in wood, that would deal with anything having to do with the mysterious influences, or that are as a mystery in the experience of one. Hence we find that certain types of puzzles are of an interest to the entity. Something of the mysterious nature, as in cryptograms, anagrams, would find an interest for the entity, and these may be used in the material world as experiences that may be made into applicable or practical things, for an advancement in the material things of the entity's experience. The environ from the Neptune experiences makes for the activities and associations dealing with things of a mystic or unseen nature, that are innate expressions of the mysterious activities. Hence those things that deal with bright lights, or that have to do with the expressions in mental or physical activity to depict or to show an activity, are of an innate interest to the entity, and bring into the experience and the associations of the entity, then, those that have had, do have, dealings with those things that make for either the thought that is expressed in journalism, or the associations with those on the stage, or the activities of same. These are not a portion of the entity's associations, but through the associations of those connected with same may the entity in its material activity bring to its own associations those things that may make for the greater expansion in whatever line of endeavor that may be brought to the materialization. Also the environs from that activity of the entity in Neptune bring those experiences from afar or from messages that may be in transmission, not only by material things, but those that may come through as upon the etherionic energies of the sources of energy. Thus the entity gains much that becomes the motivative force in its mental activity, as well as in its associations and relations with others. These will make for, too, that elemental force having its effect upon the entity in the form of waters, or large bodies of water have their peculiar effect upon the entity. And those things dealing whether within, through communicative forces from without, or the activities of a commercial nature, or such environs, play, as it were, a great part in the experience and in the affairs from the material angle in the experience of the entity.